I want to thank Mario and all the American Legion leaders who are here and all around the country who have stood strong with us in this effort. The vote we just had in the Senate, 68 to 27 with 2 yes votes absent. So 70 members of the Senate just did something today that we haven't done in decades, begin a standalone debate about the repeal of a war authorization. The last time a war authorization was repealed was in January of 1971, and it was done as an amendment to the Foreign Military Sales Act, the repeal of the Tonkin Gulf Resolution. But the last time we've had a standalone debate on a matter that warrants a full debate and full attention has been probably since long before I was born. I'm really proud to be here with Todd Young, who's been an absolute fantastic partner in this effort to put together the broadest possible bipartisan coalition that we can in both the House and the Senate to declare definitively that the Iraq wars of 1991 and 2002 are over. Why is it important to do this? First, to reflect reality. We went to war against a nation first to push their troops out of Kuwait. That mission was accomplished. And then to topple the government of Saddam Hussein in 2002. That mission was accomplished. The enemy against whom we declared war in 91 and 02 is no more. Iraq is a very different nation. Many of you saw that Secretary Austin visited Iraq last week for a very productive meeting with Prime Minister al-Sudani, talking about the Iraqis' desire that the U.S. stay with them as a security partner to battle against ISIS or other non-state terrorist groups and to check Iranian aggression in the region. There's no reason, none, to have a war authorization against a strategic partner. And so that's the first reason why we need to do this. Second, we need to do it to honor the service of Mario and so many others. He kind of walked on the applause line, as humble people often do, by talking to you about his 4 combat deployments in Iraq. One of the features of military service among this generation of soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen and women, guardians, is multiple deployments. That multiple deployments into a war zone, that was something that we didn't necessarily see so much before, but the 4, 5, 6, 7 deployment veterans is not that unusual in Virginia or anywhere. They served again and again and again, and yet so often there's been a Congress, and this is a bipartisan comment, where Congresses of both parties, under presidents of both parties, have been unwilling to exercise the Article I responsibility for looking at matters of war, peace, and diplomacy because it's tough politics. A war vote is the hardest one you'll ever make. Could go wrong. So what Congresses have tended to do is defer and abdicate an Article I responsibility to the president, support the president when it works out well. When it doesn't, how dare you? But it's time for Congress to shoulder this obligation, and I think both Senator Young and I view having a vote like this on these outdated authorizations as Congress beginning to take back and occupy a little bit of that Article I responsibility. Another reason that makes this so important is leaving outdated authorizations on the books can lead to abuse. Presidents should have to come to Congress to start wars. But if there's authorizations on the books that are outdated, a president can try to find one and torture its meaning and say, oh, look, Congress already authorized war. I don't need to come for a new debate, a new vote, where the American public can see what's at stake and watch their elected representatives declare yes or no and be accountable for the vote. Finally, the last thing I'll say is this, before I just comment upon process going forward. One of the great things about our country, there's so many things that make me really proud about our nation. Here's something that makes me proud. We have the capacity to turn an enemy into a friend. It's not that easy. There's a beautiful phrase in the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament saying we need to beat swords into plowshares, turn spears into pruning hooks. And the United States has shown, we fought 2 wars against Germany in the 20th century. They are a critical ally, and thank God they are, as they are working with us to deter the illegal invasion of Russia. Japan, we fought a war, World War II. They're now a really important ally in the Indo-PACOM and elsewhere. Iraq was an adversary. Now Iraq is a strategic partner. And that message needs to go out, that the United States has no permanent enemies. You can be an enemy or adversary today, but the United States has a desire and a capacity, and other nations have shown the same thing, to when the fighting is done and it's declared over, we can find paths forward to friendship and diplomacy and commerce and trade cultural exchange. And that's a good thing about our country. There's a magnanimity about us, and a magnanimity in the other nations as well that's allowed that to happen. I'm so glad to be doing this with Senator Young. The vote today was an overwhelming bipartisan vote to proceed to the bill. We'll be having the full debate about the bill and amendment votes likely next week. But the hope is we would have those debates, amendment votes, and get the matter queued up for final passage next week. So we've started into this debate before the 20th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, and we'll likely finish it, pass it in a bipartisan way. And then Senator Young and I will take 30 minutes off, and then we'll go work on the House as hard as we can. There's a wonderful bipartisan coalition there as well. But let me just again thank the American Legion, the support of our veterans groups from all across the country and every political inclination has been one of the reasons that we just got a vote that was so bipartisan. It doesn't happen every day in the Senate. It happened today. The American Legion gets a lot of credit for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kaine. Finally, let me introduce you to Senator Todd Young of Indiana. He has been a strong voice in the Senate for responsible foreign policy, working tirelessly to ensure that our nation's military actions are both necessary and just. In addition to his work in the Senate, Senator Young is a proud veteran, having served as a fellow Marine Corps officer in Iraq. Senator Young's dedication to our nation's security and the welfare of our military personnel make him a critical voice to fight the appeal of the Iraq AUMFs. Please join me in welcoming Senator Todd Young.
Well, thank you to Mario and to the American Legion. We would not be here but for their support and the support of so many other members of our proud veterans community around the country. I also thank our men and women in uniform for their everyday sacrifices. Today we honor them with this strong bipartisan vote, advancing this legislation to repeal the Iraq War authorizations. You know, most of my constituents are unaware. They had absolutely no idea that these legal authorities were still on the books after all these years. It seems intuitive to most Americans that we would repeal the authorizations when they were no longer needed. But we're going through the responsible, much needed, and I have to say much neglected work of finally legally bringing a war to a close today. The Constitution requires it. In fact, I would argue this is our most fundamental responsibility as federal legislators, to oversee the authorization of force, the conduct of military operations, and ultimately oversee the circumstances under which we bring the men and women who we represent, the men and women who raise their right hand and pledge their fidelity to the Constitution and our way of life and their very lives in order to protect it. We need to be able to bring them home safely. There's so much at stake here outside of the interest this might have from the legal community. It's really it's our ability to continue to attract the world's best men and women who are prepared to wear the uniform and defend our way of life as they have consistently done for generation after generation. As our veterans know better than any other, we will not incentivize the next generation to step up and fill that necessary breach to defend our way of life so that the rest of us can sleep safely at night if they don't regard our actions here in Washington as responsible and consistent with the desires of the American people. These men and women, they just regard it as their duty. I think many of us would regard them, Mario in particular, as particularly valorous, but it's just their duty. If you talk to a Marine, a sailor, a soldier, an airman, a member of the Coast Guard, they consistently say that. Well, I would say in response, well, what we owe you is our duty, our duty to uphold our oath and fulfill this sacred responsibility. I entered the United States Navy just months prior to the first Gulf War in 1991. Saddam Hussein, following the initiation The second Iraq war was, of course, killed. The Ba'athist regime, no longer in power. It is time. It is time for Congress to have its voice heard on these matters, and I believe this will establish a very important precedent moving forward so that the people I represent and Senator Kaine and so many others represent know that their voice will matter when it comes to important decisions of war and peace. I'm proud of our bipartisan showing here today. 70 votes supportive is what I anticipate in the end. We received 68 today with a couple of absences. It transcends party politics, transcends political philosophies or geography. It's just representatives of the American people trying to do the right thing at the right time. Once again, I thank the American Legion. We're going to continue to need your help on a going forward basis. Let's get this done. God bless. What a great day it is in America.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a few short minutes for both senators to field your questions. Gentlemen, thank you.
Senators, I have a question about the opposition that I'm sure you guys know this bill might face from those who say that it hurts America's military readiness. What's your response to that, and how do you convince those lawmakers otherwise?
Well, I'll start. The President continues to be Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. Don't take it from Todd Young. Take it from the Constitution of the United States, Article 2. Those powers, which have been interpreted historically quite broadly, remain the President's powers. And it's important that people understand when there is an imminent threat of danger to the American people, the President can still act. The 2001 authorization for the use of military force authorized what we now call the War on Terror. Many of us believe that at some point in the future it might be useful to take a look at that language and ensure that Congress continues to have a voice about who we fight and where we fight. But the War on Terror can continue to be conducted pursuant to the 2001 authorization for the use of military force. I would say in the country of Iraq itself, in addition to those legal authorities, we have the brave men and women of our military who've been invited into Iraq to train and assist the Iraqi armed forces so that they can repulse any threat there is to their government, to their people, and to our shared interests. The government in Iraq is our friend. That's why they invited our men and women in uniform to train their members of their military. And to the extent we can send a message, something their foreign minister has indicated would be helpful, not only to the people of Iraq, but more broadly to any who might wish them harm. Iran comes to mind. That the United States will continue to remain strongly aligned with this government and with stability in that country. That will be helpful. So I would argue that in the here and now implications of this won't be significant. They could be in Iraq, where we're actually establishing more deterrence against future dangers that could occur in the country.
Just one other element. Todd has expressed it well. The administration has said the repeal of these authorizations will not affect any ongoing military operations of the United States. The President still has Article 2 power in the 01 AUMF. And actually, it helps in our strategic partnership with Iraq to drop these war authorizations. Iran uses the continued existence of the war authorizations to try to propagandize Iraq. You see, the U.S. really isn't your friend. You know, they're really not your friend. If they were your friend, why would they have 2 war authorizations against you? Dropping these war authorizations has a way of sending a very powerful signal that the United States and Iraq working together will be a voice for stability in the region. I'll go latter and then former. So latter, there might be an amendment offered to do that, but it would not, right now, it wouldn't get the votes. I think many of us realize the 2001 authorization needs some work. It might need some sharpening, but it is an authorization that's still used by the military and by the United States to protect Americans against non-state terrorist groups. So 22 years later, trying to give it some sharper definition makes sense. Repealing it, it would not get anywhere near half votes. I couldn't support a repeal. I could support a revision. And then I have been at it for a while. So why is it different? Todd, Todd being a rock-solid partner, he came into the Senate and had worked on these issues both in the military and in the House, and as a staffer on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee many years ago. And as soon as he got on the Foreign Relations Committee and heard me droning on about it one day, he said, let's work together on this. So he's been enormously successful with Republican colleagues. I think as you get to the 20th anniversary, more and more people realize there's potential abuse of zombie authorizations sitting on the books. And I'm going to give, I'll give President Biden a plug on this. Usually administrations fight you when you are trying to repeal powers that you've granted them. The Obama administration didn't really fight us, but they weren't that wild about it. You know, they were like, well, if you can figure it out, great, but it wasn't like they were going to lean in and help. The Trump administration was sort of hostile to the idea of repealing authorizations for reasons that I understand, I hear him. But Joe Biden was on the Foreign Relations Committee for 36 years, vice president for 8 years. He wants to be the occupant of every square centimeter of Article 2, but he's not threatened by senators or House members getting together and occupying and really owning Article 1 responsibility. So to have a president who's willing to send out an administrative statement, and they sent it out again today, they'd done it earlier, saying, look, repeal these authorizations. Iraq is a partner now. That also helps get some momentum.
Does the current geopolitical moment between the Russia's war on Ukraine and the threats from China, does that play into why you think this might have gotten some level of political momentum and folks thinking it's time to move on to other wars and threats?
I think as we've seen the world get dangerous and more dangerous in so many ways in recent years, it does focus the mind. I think it makes more real, more concrete to regular Americans the possibility that we live with every day, even under the best of circumstances, that our men and women might have to go into a particular geography and fight and be willing to sacrifice their lives to keep us all free. So yes, that indeed focuses the minds. I guess what I would say, in addition, is if that ever happens, if that happens in the near term or longer term, we want to make absolutely certain that the American people are aligned with whatever policy we adopt, and the way we can show the most strength as a country is to have an open and respectful but passionate debate about these matters, collectively decide what direction we're going to go, and then be all in furtherance of that objective.
Maybe one more? Is there one more, please?
Have you spoken to House Speaker McCarthy, and what's your level of confidence that there will be votes in the House to pass this?
I have not spoken to the Speaker, but the House sponsors are very bipartisan, including people that are really close to the Speaker. This has gotten votes in the House before. Floor amendment to the NDAA, where up to 40 Republicans and all Democrats have voted for it. So we know that the votes are there. But I think Senator Young and I kind of have had the belief the best thing we could do for the House is deliver a big bipartisan vote here. And once we get to that final vote next week, the more bipartisan it is, and 70 sends a really strong message, the more likely we could get the House, hopefully to take it up standalone at a minimum in their NDAA process. But again, I think this warrants attention on its own, not necessarily connected to another big bill.
And I'm hopeful, that Speaker McCarthy appreciates just what a broad spectrum of Republicans are supportive of this legislation, not just around the country, but also in the U.S. House. From Chip Roy to Tom Cole, they've not only been supportive of this effort, they've led this effort on the Republican side in the House. I know that will be compelling to Speaker McCarthy as he considers next steps. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you guys.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. This concludes our event for today.
Thanks again, sir.
Appreciate it.
Much appreciated. Lend a lot of credibility. We'll be with you on the House.